Welcome to People in Profit. I'm Kate Moody. Coming up in this week's show, Europe's summer travel season comes to an end, punctured by protests against tourists. We'll be speaking to an industry advisor about how countries can balance their need for tourist spending while protecting local residents. As Washington scraps a controversial immigration program, we look at what role foreign-born workers play in the U.S. economy. And Singapore reaches the next level in its digital revolution. Our correspondent's been finding out about Asia's new hotspot for the gaming world. Visitors heading to some of Europe's most popular travel destinations were in for a shock this summer as locals took to the streets in protest. Demonstrators in cities like Barcelona and Venice say there are just too many tourists, sometimes rowdy and disruptive. They also worry they're being priced out of their own neighborhoods by companies that target short-term rentals. But as always, there's a catch, because tourists represent an indispensable source of revenue and economic growth. Catherine Clifford has more.
Fed up of drunk and disorderly visitors. Many in Barcelona and across Spain are sick of the cost of living being driven up by rowdy tourists.
We prefer legal tourism, where people stay in hotels and hostels, where residents are respected. When I go abroad, I don't bother the neighbours.
Firms like Airbnb are making it more profitable to rent short-term to tourists than long-term to residents, with companies buying out whole residential blocks. City authorities are tightening up rules, striking a deal with Airbnb in July in a bid to regulate the market together. Because Spain needs its tourists. The industry is being key in the country's economic recovery. It accounts for around 11% of GDP and employs 13% of the population, while tourists spent 55 billion euros in Spain last year. Other struggling European countries, such as Greece, are also dependent on the industry as a driver of growth. In 2016, tourism contributed 18.6% of the country's GDP. And Spaniards aren't the only ones growing frustrated. Residents in Venice say city policies favouring tourists are forcing locals out. The population of the historic centre has halved since 1970 to under 55,000. This summer, authorities brought in new regulations, such as fines for tourists who picnic in unauthorised spots. Meanwhile, the ancient city of Dubrovnik's considering limiting daily cruise ship visits to combat extreme overcrowding. Croatia, another European country which must strike a tough balance to keep locals on side and tourism afloat.
And for more, we're joined by Gloria Guevara, President and CEO of the World Travel and Tourism Council, also Mexico's former tourism minister. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Now, the protests that we saw over the summer highlight that there is a real challenge facing the industry at the moment. How do you think both governments and the private sector need to be dealing with those concerns?
Well, the key here is to work together. That partnership, to continue with that partnership is very important, and to have a clear agenda to move forward. So when you ask me how do we continue working together, that's the best approach to find the best solutions for each situation.
And tourists themselves also presumably have a responsibility when it comes to their behavior. What kind of message are you putting out to the groups that are actually traveling?
Well, for the people that they are traveling, the message is that they enjoy the experience, and at the same time, they take care of the environment and the assets that we have. For the people that depend on tourism, the ones that have the jobs, that they offer the best service, of course, and they take care of the travelers. Now, for the governments and the private sector, we work very closely to create more jobs.
Now, we can't, of course, underestimate the economic importance of the tourist industry. Do you think countries like Spain would still be in recession without this kind of mass tourism?
Well, I can tell you that tourism is a big contributor of Spain. As a matter of fact, it's almost 15% of their GDP. So it's not only the only reason why they are out of that recession. Of course, the macroeconomic policies from the government and the changes and reforms that the government has implemented are very successful, in my opinion. But tourism also has contributed to the benefit.
Now, the sharing economy, as we call it, has really transformed the industry in recent years. But platforms like Airbnb and HomeAway are, of course, also very controversial. How do you think is the best way to regulate these up-and-coming new platforms?
Well, Airbnb is offering a new platform and more options to the travelers. We believe that those options are good, is in the benefit for the travelers. And at the same time, we believe in a fair competition. So having the regulations in place, that will help that fair competition. So Airbnb and the sharing economy going to continue growing. It's not going away. It's just a matter of working with the local governments and implementing those regulations so that it can be competitive for the local providers as well.
Is there something to be said for the idea of targeting high-end luxury tourism rather than the cheap holiday packages? Is that something that seems feasible to you?
Well, I think there's a benefit for all. It is very important to understand that there are different types of travelers. So when you have different types of travelers, some of them would like to have an experience very high-end. Some of them would prefer to be in packages. What's important at the end of the day is the value that they provide to the different destinations while they travel. You will find that some of the packages, for instance, or in some destinations where we have a lot of travelers and the volume, they do things for the community, or they spend products from the different regions and the communities. So there's a lot of value at the same time that they provide to the different regions, the cities or towns. So I would say that both of them are very valuable.
Now, unfortunately, terrorism is also now becoming part of this conversation. We've seen attacks in many cities across Europe now. How is your organization seeing the changes in respect to that?
Well, what I can tell you is that we have seen that when, unfortunately, we have a situation of what we have seen in the past in some of the top destinations, there's a decline right away after the incident. Of course, there are cancellations. People avoid traveling to those destinations for a couple of weeks. But after that, as the sector is very resilient, it comes back. And they keep growing every year. At the end of the day, the reality is that we live in this world. We want to enjoy life. We want to travel. We want to learn about other cultures. So these isolated or randomly, actually, incidents are not going to change our life and the way we think and the way we travel.
Gloria Guevara of the World Travel and Tourism Council, thank you so much for speaking to us on People and Profit.
Thank you for the invitation.
Next up, the Trump administration has announced plans to wind down an amnesty program for certain illegal immigrants. The so-called DACA policy protected some 800,000 people who came to the U.S. as children, shielding them from deportation and allowing them to apply for work permits. Attorney General Jeff Sessions said the previous administration had overstepped its authority.
The effect of this unilateral executive amnesty, among other things, contributed to a surge of minors at the southern border that yielded terrible humanitarian consequences. It also denied jobs to hundreds of thousands of Americans by allowing those same illegal aliens to take those jobs.
The president and his supporters argue that illegal aliens are stealing American jobs. But economists say that immigrants actually play a crucial role in the U.S. economy. Brian Quinn's been finding out more. Brian?
Well, roughly 25 million immigrants are working in America. Though they make up only 13% of the population, immigrants are responsible for 17% of the nation's workforce and nearly 15% of the country's GDP. Compared with people born in the U.S., immigrants are more likely to work in buildings and ground maintenance, construction, computer, math, or science occupations, and jobs in food preparation or service. But immigrants are also more likely to be business owners and entrepreneurs. For every 10,000 immigrants to the U.S., around 62 will start a business. That's more than double the rate for native-born citizens. In 2014, immigrants to the U.S. earned an estimated $1.3 trillion, contributing $105 billion in state and local taxes and close to $224 billion in federal taxes. Although harder to track, undocumented immigrants are estimated to contribute over $11.5 billion in state and local taxes each year. So do immigrants take away U.S. jobs? It's complicated. Immigrants on average do earn less than their native counterparts and thus can drive down wages and potentially take low-skilled jobs. But working immigrants not only increase labor supply, they also create consumer demand that keeps the U.S. economy running. As the Trump administration moves to end the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, many are concerned about the cost for the U.S. economy. More than 90% of DACA recipients are employed. For businesses, the cost of losing dreamers, then hiring and training their replacements, could be enormous. Conservative think tank the Cato Institute estimates turnover costs will reach $6.3 billion.
Brian, thank you so much for that. Next, it's already a financial hub, but Singapore's also plugging into the high-tech world of gaming. Authorities are trying to attract the lucrative business by offering tax breaks and making it easier for companies to set up offices there. Our regional correspondents Clovis Casali and Charles Dupoisat sent this report.
Brand new facilities with the latest technology and common areas to nurture creativity. Pixel Studio has a flavour of Silicon Valley. These startups design video games and don't have to pay anything to be here. Singapore's government provides them with all they need. It's part of a strategy that's turned the small island city-state into a gaming hub.
We've been in the business of attracting video game companies for over 20 years now. It's been a long journey for us. It has been a priority for us to build this sector and to better understand their specific strategies and to see how best we can support them.
Industry giants Bandai Namco from Japan and Ubisoft are among those who set up here. The French company is one of the world's top video game makers with some 1.5 billion euros in revenue last year. Its studio here employs 330 people. It will soon release Skull and Bones, the first big-budget game developed by these teams. Ubisoft CEO says government incentives played a key role in choosing to establish a branch in Singapore.
They helped us to find offices, and they came also with incentives on salaries that made the cost per man-month a lot lower than what we could have in the other regions.
Singaporeans spent over 300 million euros on video games in 2016. That's more than on TVs and on-demand video services. The 5.5 million inhabitants and their high purchasing power are at the forefront of the digital revolution. The country wants to be a smart city and not just a financial hub.
That's all for this week. If you have any questions or thoughts about the stories we've been covering, you can get in touch on Facebook at France 24 Business, or you can tweet me at Kate A. Moody. Until next time, thanks for watching.
Revisited, presented by Stuart Norval.
Youngstown, the legendary American Rust Belt city, immortalized by a Bruce Springsteen song of the same name. But the glory days of the steel industry are long over. Following the crisis in the industry in the 1980s, the city lost 2/3 of its population. Youngstown is now trying to create jobs by encouraging new technology startups. But deindustrialization, mass unemployment, and drug problems make development difficult.
Revisited on France 24 and France24.com.